Have you ever walked away from someone and felt more peaceful than guilty? Most people will call you cold. They'll say you've changed, that you don't care anymore. But what if they're completely wrong? What if the ability to cut certain people out of your life isn't emotional weakness, but one of the strongest mindset traits a person can develop? The truth is, emotionally intelligent people don't fear being alone, they fear wasting their life on people who constantly drain them. In this video, you'll discover the hidden psychology behind why some people walk away so easily, why they rarely look back, and why this mindset quietly transforms every part of their life. Stay with me, because the last trait explains everything. If you enjoy deep psychology and mindset content that changes the way you see yourself and others, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin. There is a strange moment that changes a person's life forever. It doesn't happen during an argument. It doesn't happen after a dramatic betrayal. It happens in complete silence. One ordinary day, your phone stays quiet, and instead of feeling anxious, you feel relieved. You realize you haven't checked who texted you. You haven't wondered who ignored your message. For the first time in years, your peace feels more valuable than someone's attention. That is the beginning of a high-level mindset that very few people truly understand. Most people believe that cutting people off is an emotional reaction. Psychology suggests something different. In many cases, it is the result of emotional growth. The more emotionally aware you become, the less willing you are to negotiate with disrespect, manipulation, and one-sided relationships. Your standards quietly rise, and suddenly the people who once had unlimited access to your life begin losing that privilege. Think about your past. Maybe you were always the one checking in first. You remembered birthdays that everyone else forgot. You stayed awake comforting people through their darkest nights. But when your own world fell apart, your phone became strangely silent. You kept telling yourself they were busy. You made excuses for people who never made time for you. Deep inside, you weren't protecting them. You were protecting the hope that one day they would finally treat you the way you treated them. The human mind is incredibly patient when it wants to believe someone will change. We hold on to memories instead of reality. We remember the one good weekend instead of the 100 disappointing conversations. We remember promises instead of patterns. That is why so many people stay in relationships that slowly destroy their confidence. They aren't in love with who the person is today. They're attached to who they hope that person will become tomorrow. Highly self-aware people eventually notice something important. Hope is beautiful, but it becomes dangerous when it keeps you trapped. At some point, you stop asking, how can I fix this relationship? Instead, you ask a much more powerful question. Why am I working so hard to keep someone who isn't working to keep me? That single question changes everything, because from that moment forward, your attention shifts inward. Instead of chasing acceptance, you begin protecting your energy. Instead of fearing loneliness, you begin fearing emotional exhaustion. You realize that constantly explaining your worth to people is one of the fastest ways to lose it. This doesn't happen because your heart becomes colder. It happens because your self-respect becomes stronger. Psychologists often describe healthy boundaries as invisible walls that protect emotional well-being. But boundaries aren't walls built to keep good people out. They're filters designed to keep unhealthy behavior from becoming normal. Every time someone repeatedly disrespects your limits and still expects unlimited access to your life, they're teaching you exactly how much they value you. People often say, real friends never leave. But the truth is more uncomfortable. Real friends don't constantly give you reasons to leave. The strongest people aren't those who can tolerate endless disappointment. The strongest people are those who recognize when loyalty has quietly turned into self-betrayal. There is a huge difference between being patient and abandoning yourself. Unfortunately, many people confuse the two. Imagine carrying a backpack every single day. At first it feels manageable, then someone secretly adds another stone, then another, then another. Months later you're exhausted, but because the weight increased so gradually, you don't even realize how heavy life has become. Toxic relationships work exactly the same way. They rarely destroy you overnight. They drain you little by little until exhaustion feels normal. Then one day you finally put the backpack down. Everyone around you asks why you've changed. No one asks how heavy the backpack was. This is why emotionally mature people sometimes appear distant. They aren't avoiding connection. They're refusing unnecessary emotional weight. They understand something that most people learn far too late. Peace is not something you find after life becomes perfect. Peace is something you protect by choosing what deserves access to your mind. The world often celebrates people who sacrifice themselves for everyone else. But emotional intelligence teaches a different lesson. You cannot continuously pour from an empty cup without eventually collapsing. Self-sacrifice may earn temporary approval, but self-respect builds permanent stability. The interesting part is what happens next. As you begin protecting your peace, something unexpected occurs. Certain people suddenly accuse you of changing. They tell you you're selfish. They say you used to be nicer. But notice something carefully. The people most upset about your boundaries are often the people who benefited from you having none. That realization is uncomfortable, because it forces you to ask another difficult question. Were they ever attached to you, or were they simply attached to the version of you that never said no? Once that question enters your mind, you'll begin seeing every relationship differently. And what you'll discover next explains why walking away isn't actually the hardest part. The hardest part is realizing who was never walking beside you in the first place. There comes a moment in life when you stop trying to convince people that your feelings are valid. At first, this feels strange. For years you explained yourself, you wrote long messages. You apologized even when you weren't wrong. You replayed conversations in your mind, wondering what you could have said differently. You believed that if people truly understood your heart, everything would finally change. But it never did, because the truth is, people who are determined to misunderstand you don't need more explanations. They only need more opportunities to ignore them. This is one of the biggest mindset shifts emotionally intelligent people experience. They stop wasting energy trying to be understood by people who were never listening in the first place. Think about how many times you've defended your intentions. Maybe someone assumed the worst about you, even after everything you'd done for them. Maybe they questioned your loyalty, your kindness, or your character. At first, you fought to clear your name because you believed the truth would eventually win. Then life taught you something unexpected. Not every misunderstanding is meant to be corrected. Some people don't misunderstand you by accident. They misunderstand you because the version they've created of you allows them to justify how they treat you. Once you realize this, everything changes. Instead of arguing, you become quiet. Instead of proving yourself, you simply observe. Instead of chasing people, you let them walk. To the outside world, this silence looks cold. In reality, it's confidence. Psychologists often describe emotional maturity as the ability to separate your identity from other people's opinions. That's incredibly difficult because the human brain is naturally wired to seek acceptance. For thousands of years, belonging meant survival. Rejection meant danger. But today's world is different. Many people spend their lives chasing approval from people who don't even approve of themselves. Emotionally mature individuals eventually understand something powerful. If someone constantly needs to misunderstand you in order to feel better about themselves, no explanation will ever satisfy them. Your silence becomes your answer. Imagine standing in front of a dirty mirror. No matter how clean your face is, the reflection still looks distorted. Would you spend hours washing your face? Of course not. You would clean the mirror. Yet this is exactly what many people do in relationships. They keep changing themselves instead of realizing they're standing in front of someone whose perception is already distorted. High-level thinkers stop cleaning themselves for broken mirrors. They simply walk away. This doesn't happen because they think they're perfect. It happens because they finally understand that peace is impossible when your value depends on someone else's opinion. Another fascinating psychological shift begins here. You stop confusing attention with love. Many people stay connected to unhealthy relationships simply because someone occasionally checks on them. A random message, a late-night phone call, a few kind words after weeks of silence. Those tiny moments create emotional confusion. The brain begins rewarding inconsistency because it mistakes unpredictability for excitement. Behavioral psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes gambling addictive. You never know when the reward will come, so you keep investing more energy, hoping this time will be different. The same thing happens in toxic relationships. One day they ignore you, the next day they're affectionate, one week they disappear, the next week they promise everything will change. Eventually, you become addicted, not to the person, but to the possibility that things might finally improve. Then something remarkable happens. Your mindset evolves. You stop asking whether people occasionally make you happy. You start asking whether they consistently bring peace. That single change destroys emotional manipulation. Because peace isn't dramatic. Peace doesn't leave you confused. Peace doesn't make you question your worth. Peace doesn't disappear whenever it's inconvenient. Real connection feels safe, not exciting one day and painful the next. As your standards rise, another unexpected thing begins happening. Your circle becomes smaller. At first, this feels uncomfortable. You wonder if you're becoming antisocial. You wonder if something is wrong with you. But then you notice something else. The fewer people who constantly drain your energy, the more alive you actually feel. You begin reading books you've been postponing. You enjoy quiet mornings. You sleep better. Your anxiety slowly fades. You laugh more. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because unnecessary emotional noise disappeared. People often think happiness comes from adding more people into life. Sometimes happiness comes from removing the wrong ones. That's why emotionally intelligent people rarely panic when relationships end. They understand a painful truth. Not every goodbye is a loss. Some goodbyes are the beginning of finally meeting yourself again. And once you experience that kind of peace, something incredible starts happening. You become impossible to manipulate. Because manipulation only works on people who are afraid to lose others. When you're no longer afraid of being alone, control disappears. That's why people who once controlled you may suddenly accuse you of changing. They're right. You did change. You stopped choosing temporary comfort over permanent self-respect. You stopped mistaking guilt for kindness. You stopped believing that protecting yourself was selfish. Most importantly, you discovered that saying, "No to the wrong people" is often the biggest yes you'll ever say to yourself. But here's where everything becomes even more fascinating. Walking away from unhealthy people is only half of the transformation. The real change happens inside your mind. Because once you stop protecting everyone else's emotions, you finally have enough energy to heal your own. And that's exactly what we'll uncover in the next chapter, where you'll discover why people with the strongest mindset often become comfortable with solitude, and why that quiet season completely changes the direction of their lives forever. There is a season in almost every emotionally intelligent person's life that feels incredibly lonely from the outside. Friends stop calling, familiar faces disappear, invitations become rare. The room grows quieter than it has ever been before. Most people would see this as a crisis. But what if it's actually a transformation? The strongest minds eventually discover something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is the painful feeling of being disconnected, even when you're surrounded by people. Solitude is choosing your own company because it brings you peace instead of pressure. For years, you may have believed that being alone meant something was wrong with you. Society constantly teaches us that popularity equals happiness. The more friends, followers, messages, and invitations you receive, the more successful your life appears. But appearances are often deceptive. Some of the busiest people carry the deepest loneliness. They laugh in crowded rooms while silently wondering if anyone truly knows who they are. They keep conversations alive with dozens of people but feel emotionally understood by no one. Then something remarkable begins to happen. As your mindset matures, your definition of connection changes. You stop asking, "How many people are in my life?" You begin asking, "Who actually brings peace into my life?" That question changes everything. Psychologists have long understood that the human nervous system responds differently to different people. Around certain individuals, your body naturally relaxes. Around others, your shoulders tighten, your breathing becomes shallow, and your mind never truly rests. Most people ignore these signals. Emotionally intelligent people don't. They begin trusting what their body has been trying to say long before their mind was willing to accept it. Have you ever noticed how exhausted you feel after spending just an hour with certain people? Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody yelled. Nobody argued. Yet somehow you leave feeling emotionally drained. Then you spend an evening completely alone reading, walking, or simply sitting in silence, and somehow you feel lighter. That isn't your imagination. Your mind is showing you the difference between connection and emotional consumption. Some people feed your energy. Others quietly feed on it. One of the highest mindset traits is learning to recognize the difference without feeling guilty. This doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It means becoming aware of yourself. The people who fear being alone often tolerate relationships that slowly destroy their confidence. They accept disrespect because the alternative feels scarier. They stay in environments where they're constantly overlooked simply because silence feels unfamiliar. But once you've experienced genuine inner peace, something irreversible happens. You stop fearing empty rooms, because you've finally discovered that an empty room can feel far less lonely than a crowded one filled with people who never truly see you. This realization creates emotional independence. And emotional independence is one of the rarest forms of freedom. It means your happiness is no longer controlled by who replies to your messages. Your confidence isn't determined by who compliments you. Your self-worth doesn't disappear because someone chooses to walk away. For the first time, your emotional state belongs to you. That kind of freedom is incredibly powerful. Ironically, it's also the reason some people begin distancing themselves from you. Why? Because people who once controlled your emotions suddenly realize they can't control you anymore. The guilt no longer works. The silent treatment no longer works. The emotional games no longer work. You stop chasing. You stop begging. You stop explaining. And when manipulation stops working, manipulators often become louder. They may accuse you of becoming arrogant, cold, selfish, different. They're correct about one thing. You are different. You're no longer willing to trade your peace for temporary acceptance. One of the greatest philosophers once suggested that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your thoughts. But there's another truth that's equally important. The quality of your thoughts is often determined by the quality of the people surrounding you. Spend enough time around constant negativity, and your mind begins expecting disappointment. Spend enough time around people who criticize every dream, and eventually you'll question your own potential. Spend enough time around emotional chaos, and peace begins to feel unfamiliar. That's why protecting your environment isn't selfish, it's wisdom. Think about a garden. No gardener feels guilty for removing weeds. The gardener isn't being cruel, they're protecting the flowers. Your mind works exactly the same way. Every healthy boundary is a form of emotional gardening. Every relationship you outgrow creates room for healthier ones. Every difficult goodbye creates space for a better hello. The challenge is that growth almost always feels empty before it feels rewarding. There will be nights when you question your decision. Moments when you wonder if you were too harsh. Days when the silence feels uncomfortable. But don't mistake unfamiliar peace for failure. Your old life was noisy. Healing is quiet. Growth is quiet. Confidence is quiet. Peace doesn't always announce itself with excitement. Sometimes it arrives as an ordinary afternoon where your mind finally stops racing. No drama, no emotional chaos, no constant overthinking, just calm. And that's when you realize something extraordinary. You didn't lose people. You lost unnecessary stress. You didn't become isolated. You became available for healthier relationships. You didn't become emotionally unavailable. You became emotionally selective. That distinction changes your entire future. Because emotionally selective people don't reject love. They reject relationships that require them to abandon themselves. And once you've reached that level of self-awareness, one final transformation begins. It's the rarest mindset trait of all. A trait that separates people who simply survive life from those who quietly master it. And that's exactly what we'll uncover in the final chapter. There is one final mindset trait that separates people who simply protect their peace from those who completely transform their lives. It isn't confidence, it isn't intelligence, it isn't emotional toughness. It's the ability to let go without needing closure. Most people spend years waiting for an explanation they'll never receive. They replay conversations over and over, hoping one missing sentence will finally make everything make sense. They wonder why someone changed, why loyalty disappeared, or why they were treated so differently after giving so much. But emotionally mature people eventually discover something life-changing. Closure is not always something another person gives you. Sometimes it's something you give yourself. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to explain your pain, you reclaim control over your future. Think about how much energy people waste trying to understand someone who never intended to understand them back. They analyze every message, every silence, every excuse, every broken promise. But what if the answer was never hidden? What if people's actions had already told the entire story? One of the greatest mistakes we make is believing words over patterns. Someone can tell you they appreciate you 1,000 times. But if their actions constantly make you feel unimportant, your nervous system already knows the truth. High-level thinkers trust consistency more than promises. They understand that actions are the language people speak when no one is listening. Words create hope. Actions reveal reality. This mindset changes everything. Instead of asking, "Why did they do this to me?" you begin asking, "Why did I keep accepting it?" That question isn't about blaming yourself. It's about taking your power back. Because the only behavior you truly control is your own. You cannot force respect. You cannot force honesty. You cannot force loyalty. But you can decide who receives your time, your attention, and your emotional investment. And that decision changes the entire direction of your life. Many people believe strength is holding on. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing exactly when to let go. Imagine trying to hold sand tightly in your hand. The harder you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Relationships often work the same way. Real connection never has to be forced. Real respect never has to be begged for. Real love never demands that you constantly prove your worth. When something healthy enters your life, it brings stability, not confusion. It brings clarity, not constant anxiety. It brings peace, not emotional exhaustion. The people with the strongest mindset understand this. That's why they don't chase every relationship that leaves. They don't run after every person who walks away. They know something incredibly valuable. What belongs in your life will never require you to abandon yourself just to keep it. This doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy. There will still be moments when old memories return. There will still be days when loneliness whispers that maybe you should go back. Maybe you should send one more message. Maybe you should lower your standards just this once. But then you remember who you used to be, the version of yourself who accepted excuses instead of effort, who confused attention with love, who ignored red flags because being alone felt terrifying, and then you look at the person you've become, someone who sleeps peacefully, someone who no longer waits for notifications to feel valuable, someone who doesn't need constant validation to believe in themselves, someone who has finally learned that peace is more addictive than chaos. That realization changes your future forever. Because once you've experienced genuine inner peace, it's almost impossible to return to emotional survival. You begin choosing relationships that feel effortless instead of exhausting. You value honesty over popularity, respect over attention, depth over quantity, peace over performance, and slowly, your entire life begins to reflect your new standards. The most beautiful part is that you stop attracting people who only wanted access to your kindness. Instead, you begin attracting people who respect your boundaries, who celebrate your growth instead of fearing it, who stay because they value you, not because they can use you. That's when you realize something extraordinary. Cutting people off was never the goal. Creating space for a healthier life was. You weren't becoming cold. You were becoming clear. You weren't pushing people away. You were refusing to pull people who never wanted to walk beside you. And perhaps that's the highest mindset trait of all. Understanding that your life is too valuable to spend convincing people to appreciate what they already have. Because the right people never need to be convinced. They recognize your value naturally. If this message spoke to you, remember this one sentence every time you feel guilty for protecting your peace. The people I lose by choosing self-respect are never the people meant to stay. Carry that truth with you. Let it guide every decision. Let it remind you that protecting your peace is never selfish. It is one of the greatest acts of self-respect you'll ever practice. One day you'll look back and realize the hardest goodbyes became the beginning of your happiest life. And that silence you once feared will become the place where you finally found yourself. If this video helped you see your relationships in a new way, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs this message today. Leave in the comments if you're choosing peace over people pleasing from this day forward. Until next time, protect your energy, trust your intuition, and never apologize for becoming the person your future deserves.